The school year is back in full swing, and Janae, that can only mean one thing.
College football is back, baby, which means our Red Zone to End Zone team will continue to work hard to provide you the latest college football news and updates throughout the season. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Muchmore.
And I'm Brandon Williams. We are geared up for another exciting season, but before we start talking about the team talent, I think Janae has some predictions.
Don't get too excited. One of the things I love about college football is how unpredictable it is. And let me just start by saying week one will be one to remember. You have Alabama and FSU squaring off in Atlanta in what many believe could be the prelude to this year's championship.
A popular opinion is these two teams will see each other in a championship game, but I won't say these are the two teams that I have going to a championship game. I need at least 6 weeks to say who will go.
I won't comment on the championship just yet, but here's an interesting stat for you. Brandon, do you know who holds the longest opening game win streak?
The Florida Gators.
The Florida Gators. And they are playing the Michigan Wolverines in Texas, who destroyed them during the 2016 Citrus Bowl by 41-7. They just might put an end to that streak, but I do like how Mac is starting to step things up a bit in the season opener.
Well, I think the more important question is, do you know what colors you'll be wearing at the end of the season when you lose our College Pick'em Challenge?
Orange and blue, because I'm not going to lose.
I think you mean garnet and gold.
The season hasn't even started, and the trash talking has already begun. Brandon is referring to an annual bet we make, and you can be a part of it too. Just sign up for our ESPN College Pick'em Challenge.
You can download the ESPN Fantasy app and register for Red Zone and End Zone group within the College Pick'em Challenge. Every week, you'll be assigned to pick the winner of 10 games they provide. You get a point for every correct answer, and if you are the victor at the end of the season, we will give you $30 cash.
As for Brandon, whoever loses will be forced to go out into the Plaza of the Americas sporting some hideous Seminole attire, where the loser will be harassed by fellow students. But if you need some help making those picks, we've got you covered with our weekly college football previews every Friday evening. But for now, we're about to give you a preview of the top 20 going into the 2017 season.
And here's a quick piece of advice. Steer clear of Janae's picks.
Florida State hopes to finish its season the way it's starting in Atlanta. Jimbo Fisher is ready to bounce back from a disappointing 10-3 season to contend for another shot at a championship trophy.
DeAndre Francois will return as quarterback after a decent first season, throwing 3,350 yards, 420 touchdowns, but the rest of the offense has some big shoes to fill.
With the departure of star running back Dalvin Cook, wide receiver Travis Rudolph, and left tackle Rod Johnson, the Seminoles bring in Cam Akers. Akers is a top running back prospect who rushed for 2,100 yards and 34 touchdowns his senior season. Take a look at this. This kid is fast and explosive through the middle.
Look at him go. One thing Jimbo Fisher has repeatedly said in the preseason is that he believes Francois is the perfect quarterback to build an offense around.
In terms of quarterbacks, though, Fisher has had it good. I mean, look at his former talent. Christian Ponder, E.J. Manuel, and Jameis Winston were all drafted in the first round.
And he is on the way to adding a fourth to that. Janae, you said earlier that the one thing that might turn the tide for Bama was the Seminole defense. Why is that?
Well, the Noles defense will remain intact for the most part. The biggest loss will be defensive end DeMarcus Walker, who was responsible for 16 sacks last season. But they still have Josh Sweat and Brian Burns, and with the new recruiting class, they will have a lot of defensive depth on the bench, covering most positions with third strings.
Don't forget Derwin James will be back in his safety after last season's knee injury. This is going to be huge for the Noles.
In fact, one of the most memorable ACC Media Day moments was his response to the question, "Can you break the Heisman drought of defensive players?"
And he said he was more than capable. Offensive players have dominated the Heisman since 1997 when Michigan quarterback Charles Woodson beat the favorite from Tennessee, Peyton Manning.
But what I love about this kid is that he served as a de facto coach from the sidelines during the extent of his injury to gain a new perspective for the game. You can expect James to wreak havoc on his opponents, and I think the Seminole defense is only going to get stronger this year. Will they see Bama at the end of the season? I doubt it, but I think they're going to have a great season nonetheless.
From my experience with Florida State, they always seem to stumble somewhere and drop a game. Though I see them doing that with the Crimson Tide this season with the very first game. The playoff committee is very forgiving when it comes to losing early in the season, and it will keep them from getting too cocky, as one more loss will potentially knock them out of the playoffs. They play a tough schedule with Clemson and Florida on the road, but I believe they will get the nod and move on to the playoffs.
They lost the national championship after an undefeated season in 2015, but that did not stop the Clemson Tigers from earning their redemption and securing last year's national title.
However, not even that was good enough to secure them a better ranking than number 5 going into this preseason.
Well, that's due to the fact that they lost the driving force behind the offense. I'm not too sure how the Tiger offense is going to fare with the loss of quarterback Deshaun Watson, running back Wayne Gallman, and 2 NFL caliber receivers.
They finished last season ranked 12th in the nation with over 500 yards and 39 points per game. Replacing a quarterback like Watson is going to be a challenge. Dabo has found a decent dual-threat quarterback in Kelly Bryant, who is expected to take over for Watson.
Maybe, but he is inexperienced and lacks the receiving core Watson had. Not saying Bryant can't jump in and take charge as quickly as Watson did, he just doesn't have as much to work with.
Well, luckily for him, he's got a cupcake season opener against Kent State to get some practice in.
I think it will get caught in the scramble quite a bit early on. Even though Hunter Renfrow is returning as wide receiver, the Tigers will bring in Ray McLeod, who is also a decent catcher but is limited to mid-range passes. So I think the Tigers will be relying on the run game more than they have had to in recent years.
Things are looking much better than defensively, and as you love to say, defense is what wins games.
That it does. The return of 7 starters in a previous top 10 defense makes the Tigers a huge threat. They limit their opponents to 18 points per game.
The secondary may be of concern as the Tigers bid farewell to first-team All-ACC performers.
This defense can hold decent offenses to less than 300 yards a game, but the Tigers are going to rely on running the ball more and a strong defense capable of cleaning up whatever mess that offense creates. They will very likely miss the opportunity to compete for another national title, but they should earn a spot in a decent bowl game.
At this point, the Clemson defense is effective when it comes to creating more offensive opportunities. In the last 2 seasons, the Tigers had a total of 53 turnovers, but that didn't seem to hurt them in the end. Clemson comes up in the ACC and needs to watch out for their back-to-back weeks of tough games with Auburn at home and Louisville on the road. Unfortunately for them, they would have to pull off a major upset against a team with more experience to even be seen in the playoffs. They will head to a New Year's Six Bowl, all based on how Kelly Bryant develops.
The Louisville Cardinals were one of the flashiest teams last season. This is given by their Heisman winner, Lamar Jackson, who propelled one of the great offenses ever seen.
That's right, Lamar Jackson put in probably one of the most memorable seasons ever created. Jackson ran for 1,500 yards and passed for 3,500 yards. That is ridiculous, but there is a super flaw to this superhuman: turning over the ball. He cost him several games by carrying the ball carelessly.
Unfortunately, the rushing offense will take a fall as the primary running back is no longer there. This leaves a void and will make someone have to step up to the call. This is a problem and will need to find a solution so Jackson doesn't take too many hits.
The biggest loss is the receiving core as they enter the season. They lost their top 3 wide receivers, which is a devastating blow as Jackson is forced to create chemistry with some of the other players. That could be a hindrance to an offense that averaged 42.5 points per game.
Their defense is really talented as they only allowed 23.8 points per game. The biggest thing is that they are returning 7 starters to this defense, and they are eager to improve.
The biggest story on Louisville's defense is the loss of 3 multi-year All-ACC linebackers. The linebacker arguably is the most important part of the defense, as it is their duty to stop running backs and be able to defend during the pass. They do, however, have some help returning with Stacey Thomas, who was second in the team for tackles, and James Hearns, who racked up an impressive 8 sacks.
This year they retained most of their secondary, only losing 1 minor member of the core. They allowed 207 yards passing a game last year, and they will need to close that down to win some of the more crucial games they have this year.
I don't see Louisville being that effective and will end up losing to Florida State, which will derail their season. Their offense will be as spectacular, but the thing is, people have had all the offseason to scout the special talent and how to stop Lamar Jackson. They lost their last 3 games last season. They may catch Clemson early on in the 3rd week, but they won't be as dominant as last season. Miami! Mark Richt leads the Miami Hurricanes for his 2nd season after starting off with a 9-4 season.
The Hurricanes will look to be a much improved team, but there is one thing that hinders them: their quarterback battle that has ended with Malik Rozier to be selected for the job. Rozier will take the reins, but has only a smidge of experience attempting 4 passes last season. He also has run twice for 65 yards, meaning he can be mobile.
They luckily will return some of their ground game as Mark Walton returns for his 3rd year. He carries the ball for over 1,100 yards and for 14 touchdowns. With this relief, it should allow the Hurricanes to put Rozier for 2 games to gain experience before throwing him into the gauntlet of Florida State.
That is true, and Miami also returns 4 full-time starters from last year on the offensive line that should be able to hold up to allow the quarterback more time to decide where he wants to go with the ball.
Well, the Hurricanes' defense will be pretty threatening as they only allowed 18.5 points per game last year, and that was with only 4 returning starters. This year, they have 8 starters, and I expect there to be more improvement.
Last season, the Hurricanes were 8th in the nation in tackles for loss. They bring back a true freshman, Joe Jackson, who tallied up a total of 8.5 sacks last season. This also is threatening because on top of that, they only have to replace a backup and return a whole bunch of talent.
Last season, the Hurricanes fielded a completely inexperienced group of linebackers that helped the team go from 28 points a game and 15 to nearly 19 points a game. Michael Pickney, Shaq Quarterman, and Zach McLeod were those true freshmen that led the teams in tackles number 2, number 5, and number 9 respectively. This year, they returned the group and should be one of the best linebacker groups in the nation.
The big weakness for this defense is their secondary. They only return 1 starter, and that could be a problem for defending against the aerial attack. That 1 starter is Jaquan Johnson, but they also bring in FCS All-American D. Delaney. But who knows if he can transition his success to a bigger stage.
The biggest determining factor for the success of the Miami Hurricanes is their ability to actually develop their quarterback quickly to decent play. I think the Hurricanes have a very manageable schedule, and their only big threat is the 3rd week at Florida State. And if they get the win there, they would only have to face another threat in the ACC championship game. But I don't expect them to be spectacular, but may get into a decent bowl and potentially a New Year's Six bowl. Well, that concludes our show for the AP Top 20.
Don't forget to tune in next week. We'll be covering your Week 1 college football preview featuring the best games of the week. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at BJ_RedZone, where we'll have all the updates and game coverage. Have a good night.